Every morning followed the same carefully choreographed routine. My 5-year-old son, Caleb, would slip his small hand into mine, and together we'd walk beside Marcus toward the Metro North station in White Plains. The routine was so precise, it almost felt rehearsed. Marcus always looked immaculate: pressed gray suit, polished shoes, briefcase tucked neatly under his arm. To the outside world, he looked like the perfect provider: dependable, predictable, safe. He greeted the neighbors with polite nods and practiced smiles, always checking his watch as if time itself were chasing him. I trailed beside him, matching his pace, carrying the quiet weight of a life that looked flawless from the outside. Our son skipped ahead, backpack bouncing against his shoulders, humming to himself. Anyone watching would have seen an image of stability, a family that had everything together. But somewhere beneath that picture-perfect surface, something in me felt wrong. When we reached the station, Marcus bent down, kissed Caleb's head, and straightened his tie. He never lingered. He never looked back. I stood there, holding my son's hand, watching my husband blend into the crowd of commuters like he belonged nowhere else. As always, I waved. As always, he didn't notice. We turned toward home, and that familiar, hollow feeling settled into my chest. Life felt like an endless loop, routine without warmth, silence without peace. Our apartment was full of order, but empty of comfort. I told myself this was normal, that stability sometimes felt dull, that not all love was passionate or loud. But something had been gnawing at me lately, a quiet unease I couldn't name. Halfway down the block, Caleb tightened his grip on my hand. I looked down at him, surprised by the tension in his small fingers. "Mom?" he whispered. I stopped walking and bent toward him. "What is it, sweetheart?" He hesitated, eyes dropping to the pavement. When he spoke again, his voice trembled. "I don't want to go home." The words hit me like a sudden chill. I forced a gentle smile, assuming fear or childish imagination. "Why would you say that?" He swallowed hard, his shoulders lifted as if he were bracing himself. "I heard Dad talking last night." My heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" I asked softly. He looked around, then leaned closer, lowering his voice as though someone might overhear us in the open street. He said he has a plan about you and me." For a moment, the world around us disappeared. The hum of traffic, the passing strangers, everything faded behind the sound of my own heartbeat. "What kind of plan?" I asked, though my voice betrayed me. Caleb shook his head, eyes shining with fear. "I don't know, but he sounded mad and serious." A cold weight settled in my chest. I crouched down and wrapped my small body against mine. I told myself he must have misunderstood. Children overhear things. They imagine. They confuse words. That's what I told myself. But something in his expression, something too old for a child, refused to let me believe it. I forced a smile, brushing his hair back gently. "You probably misunderstood, sweetheart. Daddy loves us." He didn't answer. We walked the rest of the way home in silence. I kept my grip tight around his hand, as though letting go might make everything collapse. When we reached our building, I felt it again. That strange sensation of stepping into a place that no longer felt safe. As we entered the apartment, everything looked normal, too normal. Clean counters, perfectly arranged furniture, the illusion of order. Yet beneath it all, something felt off. That night, while I prepared dinner, I watched Marcus move around the kitchen with his usual calm precision. Every gesture felt rehearsed, controlled. His voice was pleasant, his questions casual, but my skin prickled with unease. I couldn't stop replaying my son's words. He has a plan. When I went to tuck Caleb into bed, he clung to me tighter than usual. I kissed his forehead, promising everything was okay, even as dread coiled inside my chest. Later, after the apartment fell silent,
I lay awake beside my husband, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was slow and even, peaceful, too peaceful. That night, I realized something had shifted. Whatever life we had been living was no longer safe to trust, and though I didn't yet know what my husband was hiding, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer sleeping beside the man I thought I married, and whatever secret he was keeping, it was only the beginning. That night, sleep never truly came. I drifted in and out of shallow half-dreams, every small sound jolting me awake. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards, the rhythm of Marcus's breathing beside me, steady, controlled, almost rehearsed. Every sound felt louder than it should have, like my instincts were tuned to danger. When morning came, I felt as though I'd run a marathon in my sleep. I rose quietly, careful not to wake him, and went to check on Caleb. He was curled beneath his blanket, thumb tucked under his chin, peaceful for now. I lingered there longer than usual, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest, silently promising myself I would keep him safe no matter what it cost. Breakfast passed with forced normalcy. Marcus read the news on his phone, occasionally nodding or making a comment about traffic or work deadlines. His voice was calm, his manner polite. If I hadn't heard my son's words, if I hadn't felt that chill in my bones, I might have believed everything was fine. But something in his eyes had changed. When he left for work, I watched from the window as he disappeared down the street. The moment the door closed, the apartment felt heavier, as if it had been holding its breath while he was inside. I locked the door behind it without really thinking about it, then rested my back against it, trying to steady myself. That's when I noticed it. The lock. A second deadbolt, newly installed above the old one, shiny, untouched with wear. I stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. I was certain it hadn't been there before. Why would he add another lock without mentioning it? The question echoed through my mind, loud and relentless. I touched the metal, cold against my fingers. Something inside me recoiled. That day, I couldn't focus on anything. Every sound made me flinch. When I tried to distract myself with chores, my eyes kept drifting back to the door, to the windows, to every corner of the apartment that suddenly felt unfamiliar. This was my home, but it no longer felt like mine. That afternoon, while tidying the living room, I noticed a drawer in the sideboard slightly ajar. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but enough to draw my attention. I knew I hadn't opened it. My heart began to race. I hesitated, then slowly pulled it open. Inside were papers, neatly stacked, deliberate. I recognized official-looking forms, thick envelopes, stamped seals. My hands trembled as I pulled them out. Insurance documents. Multiple policies, all in my name. My breath caught in my throat. I flipped through the pages, my eyes skimming dates, numbers, signatures. Each page confirmed what my mind refused to accept. My husband had taken out multiple life insurance policies on me, quietly, without my knowledge. The room seemed to tilt. Why would he need so many? Why hadn't he told me? A chill spread through my body as I realized the timing lined up perfectly with the change in his behavior, the distance, the secrecy, the cold precision. I closed the folder with shaking hands and slid it back into place, my heart hammering so loudly I was afraid he could hear it from wherever he was. I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was proof. That evening, I acted like everything was normal. I cooked, I smiled, I listened as he spoke about his day. But inside, I was watching him with entirely new eyes. Every gesture felt calculated. Every glance held meaning I'd never noticed before. When night fell and he sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, I pretended to read while quietly observing him. At one point, he stepped into the hallway to take a call. His voice dropped low, urgent. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The tension in his posture said enough. Later, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid it would wake him. I replayed every moment of the day, every word my son had said, every detail I had uncovered. Something terrible was unfolding, and whatever Marcus was planning, I was running out of time. I turned my head and looked at my son sleeping peacefully beside me, his small chest rising and falling. A fierce resolve burned through my fear. No matter what it took, I would protect him, even if it meant uncovering a truth I wasn't ready to face, even if it meant realizing the man I married was someone I never truly knew.
The next morning, I woke before the sun, my mind already racing. I lay still beside Marcus, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, studying the shape of his silhouette in the dim light. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. It struck me then how easily someone could hide behind calmness, how danger didn't always announce itself with anger or violence. Sometimes it whispered. I waited until he left for work before moving. The door clicked shut and I stood frozen for a full minute, listening for his footsteps to fade down the hall. Only when I was certain he was gone did I finally exhale. I had to know more. My hands shook as I began searching the apartment again, this time with intention. I moved carefully, methodically, opening drawers I had never bothered with before, checking shelves I had always ignored. Every sound made my heart jump. The fear wasn't just of being caught, it was of what I might find. In the bedroom closet, behind a stack of folded jackets, I noticed a slim black folder wedged deep against the back wall. It wasn't there by accident. My stomach twisted as I pulled it out. Inside were copies of documents I had never seen, bank statements, legal forms, correspondence printed from email. My name appeared again and again, typed neatly in places I had never authorized. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Then I saw it, a beneficiary form. My name listed under insured, his name listed under sole beneficiary. I stared at the words until they blurred. A sharp ringing filled my ears. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might faint. This wasn't preparation, this was premeditation. My legs nearly gave out as I sank onto the bed, the papers slipping from my fingers. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Why would someone take out policies like this? Why so many? And why without telling me? A terrible realization settled into my bones. This wasn't about protection, this was about profit. My thoughts raced to Caleb, to his small hand in mine that morning, to the way his voice had shaken when he spoke. A cold wave of dread washed over me. He knew. He had sensed something I had been too blind or too afraid to see. I carefully returned the folder exactly as I found it, my movements slow and deliberate. Then I locked myself in the bathroom and slid down against the door, pressing my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming. This was real, and I was in danger. That evening, I watched Marcus more closely than ever. Every word he spoke felt rehearsed, every smile felt hollow. When he reached for me, I flinched without meaning to. He noticed, his eyes narrowing just a fraction, but he said nothing. During dinner, he casually mentioned that he might need to travel for work soon. The way he said it, too casual, too rehearsed, made my stomach drop. "How long?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Just a few days, nothing to worry about." I nodded, forcing myself to smile, but inside I was screaming. Later, after Caleb was asleep, Marcus retreated to the living room with his laptop. I waited until I was sure he was distracted, then quietly crept closer. From the hallway, I could see the glow of the screen reflected on his face. He was typing rapidly, his expression cold and focused. I couldn't see the screen clearly, but I heard him whisper, "It'll be done soon." My blood turned to ice. I retreated to the bedroom, heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it.
I locked the door, then immediately felt foolish. What good would a flimsy lock do if he truly meant me harm? I sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking, trying to think logically. Panic wouldn't save me. Fear wouldn't protect my son. I needed proof. I needed a plan. And above all, I needed to stay alive. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floor, every shift of air made my heart race. I held my breath whenever I heard footsteps, convincing myself that this might be the moment everything ended. But morning came, and with it, a terrible clarity. Marcus was planning something big, something final, and if I didn't act soon, I might not get another chance. That morning, I moved through the apartment like a ghost. Every sound felt amplified: the kettle boiling, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft thud of my own footsteps. I kept my face neutral, my movements careful. I had learned that survival now depended on how well I could pretend. Marcus acted normal, too normal. He kissed my cheek before leaving, his lips lingering half a second longer than usual. I forced myself not to recoil. When the door closed behind him, my knees nearly gave out. I didn't waste a second. I went straight to the bedroom, locked the door, and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on the floor just to steady myself. I opened my gallery and scrolled through the photos I had secretly taken of the insurance papers, the dates, the amounts, the signatures. Then I opened my notes app and began writing everything down: dates, behaviors, things he'd said, changes I had noticed. I needed a timeline, evidence, something concrete. As I wrote, patterns emerged that made my stomach turn. The increase in insurance coverage, the sudden interest in my routines, the way he always asked what time I'd be home, the new lock, the late-night calls, the coldness. This wasn't paranoia. This was planning. I wiped my face and stood up. I couldn't stay frozen anymore. I needed help, but carefully. I couldn't call just anyone. I didn't know who might be connected to him or what he might overhear. I remembered something then, something small, almost insignificant at the time. A few weeks ago, while we were out, my son had accidentally recorded a voice memo on my phone while playing. I'd almost deleted it without listening. Almost. With shaking hands, I opened the audio file. At first, it was just background noise. Then, voices. Marcus's voice. Clear, cold, focused. Once she signs, everything falls into place. No one will question it. My breath hitched. Another voice responded, female, unfamiliar. And the child. There was a pause. Then Marcus spoke again. He won't be a problem. I dropped the phone. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed through the room like a gunshot. My knees buckled and I collapsed onto the bed, gasping for air. The world spun violently around me. This wasn't fear anymore. It was terror. He wasn't just planning something vague. He was planning everything, and I was running out of time. I grabbed the phone again and backed up the recording to every place I could think of: cloud storage, email, a hidden folder. I sent it to myself, then to an old email account I barely used, just in case. My hands shook so badly I could barely type. Then I heard the front door. My heart stopped. I scrambled to erase any trace of what I was doing. I shoved the phone under the pillow, wiped my face, and forced myself to stand upright just as Marcus stepped inside. "You look pale," he said calmly. "Everything okay?" I nodded, my voice barely steady. "Just tired." He studied me for a moment, too long, then smiled. "You should rest." That smile chilled me more than anger ever could. That night, I barely slept. I lay beside him, listening to his breathing, waiting for a sound that might mean something was about to happen. I counted the seconds. I planned escape routes in my head. I memorized the way his footsteps sounded when he walked. By morning, I had made my decision. I couldn't stay. I needed help, and I needed it fast. As soon as he left for work, I packed a small bag for my son and myself. Only essentials. I told myself to stay calm, to move slowly. Panic would betray me. I told my son we were going to visit someone special. He nodded without question. He trusted me completely. Before leaving, I took one last look around the apartment. It no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. I locked the door behind me and walked away without looking back. As I stepped onto the street, sunlight hit my face, and for the first time in days, I took a full breath. But I knew this was only the beginning, because the moment I reached my destination, everything would change, and there would be no turning back.
The moment I stepped through my sister's front door, my legs nearly gave out. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself together until the weight of fear finally loosened its grip. My sister took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Talk to me," she said gently, guiding me inside. I didn't answer right away. I just hugged my son, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair, grounding myself. Only when he was settled on the couch with his favorite blanket did I finally speak. "I think Marcus is planning something dangerous." Her face drained of color. I told her everything, every detail I had kept locked inside: the insurance policies, the late-night calls, the strange behavior, the recording. As the words poured out, my voice shook, but I didn't stop. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the fear alone. When I finished, the room was silent. My sister sat back slowly, her hands trembling. "You did the right thing coming here," she said. "You and Caleb are not going back there." Those words cracked something open inside me. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear them. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. I kept checking the doors, the windows, my phone. I half expected Marcus to show up demanding answers, but the night passed quietly. The next morning, I made the hardest decision of my life. I went to the police. Walking into that station felt like stepping off a cliff. My voice shook as I explained everything: the insurance policies, the recordings, the behavior, the fear. I expected disbelief, dismissal. Instead, the officer's expression slowly shifted from polite concern to something darker. "This is serious," he said finally. "We need to look into this immediately." Relief and fear collided in my chest. They took my statement in full, listened to the recording, and asked detailed questions about Marcus's routine. When I handed over the screenshots and documents, I saw the shift in their posture. They weren't just listening anymore. They were building a case. I walked out of that station shaken but lighter, as if I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for weeks. Over the next few days, everything moved quickly. The police began surveillance. They advised me not to return home. I stayed with my sister, barely sleeping, jumping at every sound. I kept my phone close at all times, terrified I'd miss a call. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was the detective. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we have reason to believe your husband has been planning something far more serious than we initially thought." My stomach dropped. "They're monitoring him now," he continued, "but you need to stay where you are. Do not contact him. Do not return home." I thanked him, my voice barely steady. After the call, I sat in silence, holding my son close. He looked up at me and asked, "Are we safe now?" I swallowed hard. "We're getting there." That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every passing car made my heart race. I kept replaying everything in my mind, wondering how close I had come to disaster. The next day, the call came. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice firm but calm, "we have arrested your husband." My knees buckled. I had to sit down. "He was taken into custody this morning. We found enough evidence to move forward." I couldn't speak. Tears streamed down my face. Relief, shock, grief, all tangled together. When I finally found my voice, all I could whisper was, "Is my son safe?" "Yes," he said gently. "You both are." I hung up and broke down completely, sobbing into my hands. It was over. The fear that had consumed me for so long was finally loosening its grip. Later that day, I held my son close, listening to his steady breathing. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace.
The danger had passed, but the scars would remain. The days after his arrest felt unreal, like I was watching my life unfold from outside my own body. Everything moved too fast and too slowly at the same time. Police interviews, paperwork, long hours of waiting in sterile rooms that smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Every question they asked reopened wounds I barely had the strength to look at. But this time, I wasn't alone. My sister stayed by my side, never leaving me for long. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out after hearing fragments of what happened. Some offered words, others simply sat with me in silence. I learned quickly that healing didn't come in dramatic moments. It came in quiet ones, when someone handed me a cup of tea or wrapped a blanket around my shoulders without asking. The investigation moved faster than I expected. The evidence I had gathered, combined with the recordings, financial trails, and surveillance, painted a picture too clear to deny. Marcus's carefully constructed life unraveled piece by piece. The man who once appeared composed and respectable was now exposed for who he really was. Still, even knowing he was in custody, fear lingered. At night, I jolted awake at the smallest sound. My body hadn't yet learned that we were safe. Caleb slept next to me most nights, his small hand resting against mine, as if he needed to reassure me that I was still there. Sometimes he'd whisper, "Mom, he can't hurt us anymore, right?" I pulled him close and said, "No, he can't." And I meant it, even if part of me was still learning to believe it. Weeks passed. The legal process moved slowly, but it moved. I gave statements, I answered questions I never thought I'd have to answer. Each retelling reopened wounds, yet each time I spoke, I felt a little stronger. I was reclaiming my voice. One afternoon, a detective called to tell me they had enough evidence to formally charge him. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the wall, letting the weight of it settle. He would no longer have control over my life. That realization was both freeing and terrifying. I began therapy shortly after. It was hard at first, saying things out loud that I had buried for years. But slowly, piece by piece, I started to understand how deeply fear had shaped my choices. I learned that survival doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like endurance. Sometimes it looks like staying quiet until you can finally speak safely. My son began therapy too. Watching him talk about his feelings, watching him smile again, reminded me why I had fought so hard. He started sleeping through the night. The shadows under his eyes faded. He laughed more easily. We moved into a small apartment across town. A fresh start. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. The first night there, I stood in the doorway and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The house was quiet, but not in a frightening way. It was calm, honest, safe. Over time, the fear loosened its grip. I stopped jumping at every noise. I started laughing again, real laughter. I made new routines. Morning walks, weekend pancakes, simple joys that felt revolutionary after everything we'd endured. And then one day, while watching my son play in the park, I realized something powerful. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were healing. The scars were still there, invisible but real. They always would be, but they no longer defined us. They were reminders of what we survived, not what we were. I looked at my son, running freely under the sun, and felt something bloom inside my chest. Hope. Real, steady hope. We had been through hell, and we had made it out. Together.